Hey, what's up everybody, 8-Bit Flashback here. Today I'll be testing out the Sega Genesis HDTV cable made by Hyperkin that supports 720p resolution. And I will be comparing this against a bunch of other products out there, such as Composite, Scart, and Retrovision cables. And I will also show comparisons between the Mega Retron HD and the Mega SG. So let's find out if this cable is worthy. So I picked up this cable for $29 at one of my local retro video game shops called Next Level Games, located in Casper, Wyoming. But you should be able to find this cable on Amazon, eBay, and other major vendors as well. And here's a look at the Hyperkin cable. It's very simple to use. One end plugs into the Genesis, the other plugs into an HDMI port on your TV. And a USB power supply is required as well. Located on the cable, you'll find an aspect ratio switch to change from the original 4:3 to 16:9 full screen. And now let's take a look at the cable in action. So to start off, I was using that 4:3 aspect ratio, then I went ahead and hit that switch and changed it to the 16:9, and that's what we're viewing now. As far as the visual appearance goes, I think this cable provides a drastic improvement over standard composite cables when using on the HDTVs, but it does have some issues. One issue I have noticed is the resolution looks nice and sharp while objects on the screen are not in motion, but as soon as objects like Sonic start moving, I notice the resolution sharpness is not as good. Now I'm not sure exactly what's going on here, but to me it is noticeable, but I would not consider this a huge deal. It's just something I figured I should point out. Now let's check out the cable again, and here's where you plug in your micro USB cable, and it does not come with a USB power supply, but it does include that micro USB cable. And this cable also comes supplied with an adapter for the Sega Genesis Model 1. Now this cable will plug directly into the Genesis Model 2 and Model 3, but for the Model 1 you will have to use this adapter because it's a different style plug-in. Now when you're using this cable with the Model 1, that presents another issue because the Model 1 does not have stereo output from the rear. The only stereo output on the Model 1 Sega Genesis is from the front. So you will not be able to get true stereo sound from the Model 1 Genesis when using this cable, so this may be a disappointment for some of you out there. Now back to good news, I did test this cable on all my Sega Genesis accessories that I have, and it seems to be working good. The Sega CD sound and visuals look great, but I have noticed a light humming sound present when all my accessories are plugged in at the same time. And I would just consider this a minor issue because it's something I really can't hear at all during gameplay. And I did test out the 32X as well, and that requires hooking up that 32X like normal with the patch cable. Then you'll plug in your Hyperkin cable to the output on the 32X itself. Now all I have to do is plug in 3 different AC adapters and I'm off and running with a crazy amount of wires. Now let's go ahead and check out some 32X gameplay footage using the Hyperkin HDTV cable, and we'll try out Star Wars Arcade.
Wipe out enemy fighters.
As far as the sound quality goes when using the Hyperkin cable, I would say it's pretty good. It sounds nice and clean when playing on the Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X. The only issue that bothers me is that there's no stereo support for the Genesis Model 1. So when testing on the 32X using the Hyperkin cable, it seems to be working well. Now let's go ahead and test out a Master System game. Now I don't have the official power-based converter for the Master System games for the Sega Genesis, but I do have a Sega Master System adapter that's designed to work with the analog Mega SG. And this will work as long as I remove the cartridge casing from the adapter because it's too thick to fit in the cartridge slot. So now let's go ahead and test out a Master System game. This is Great Basketball. So it seems that the Master System games are working fine as well. Now let's move on to some comparisons. And we'll start with the standard Composite versus the Hyperkin HDTV cable. And if you take a look here at the still shot, you can see that the Hyperkin cable produces a much sharper, cleaner image. So it's a no-brainer who the winner is here. The Hyperkin cable on the right looks much better in 720p HD. Although I have noticed the colors don't look quite as bright as they do on the composite cables, but this really isn't an issue for me because it's just a slight difference. Now let's move on to the next comparison using a $8 Scart cable and a cheap $35 Scart to HDMI converter. And here with the still shot, you'll notice the colors are brighter and the resolution looks slightly sharper using the Scart cables, which is on the left. So for this comparison, I would say that the Scart cable with my cheap HDMI converter actually looks better. Now there is some issues involved when using this type of Scart setup. One would be that I can't change the aspect ratio. I'm stuck with only being able to use 16:9 full screen. And with this setup, it does introduce some very small amounts of lag, but I would say it's very minor because I'm coming up with maybe 600ths of a second, which really shouldn't be noticeable to most people out there. And when using the Hyperkin HDTV cable, I have not experienced any type of lag, and I can change that aspect ratio. And it's just a much smaller and more convenient setup when using the Hyperkin cable. So for this comparison, I would say it's a tie. Now let's do a comparison with the HD Retrovision Genesis component cables, which can be purchased starting around $63. And one very nice feature with the Retrovision cable is that it has a 3.5mm audio input that can be used with the Model 1 Sega Genesis. And this cable will also work with the Sega Saturn with the use of an adapter. And just to let you know, I did test that Retrovision Saturn adapter out with the Hyperkin cable, and to no surprise, it doesn't work. So the Retrovision capture is featured here on the left, and the Hyperkin is on the right, and I would say the visuals are better with the Retrovision cables. It's a brighter and sharper image. As far as the sound quality goes, I would say it's a tie when using on the Genesis Model 2. But for the Genesis Model 1, I would give that advantage to Retrovision because it does support the stereo output that comes from Model 1. Now there is issues involved with Retrovision cables. One which is huge to me is that they're not compatible with all HDTVs. For example, I have 4 different HDTVs in my household, and the cables only work on one of my TVs. Now you can buy a RetroTink component to HDMI adapter, but then you have to spend another $100. Another issue would be that there's no 16:9 full screen support, just 4:3. But with all that being said, I would still declare the Retrovision cables as the winner. As long as you have a compatible TV, the quality is better. Now let's do a Hyperkin against Hyperkin comparison. This is the Mega Retron HD made by Hyperkin that outputs a 720p HD signal. And I would say the Mega Retron on the left has slightly brighter colors, but the sharpness and resolution looks better on the Hyperkin HDTV cables on the right. The audio I'd say is very similar, but I think I would give a slight edge to the Hyperkin HDTV cables. The sound has just a little bit more depth to it. So the winner this time is the Hyperkin HDTV cables. And now let's check out the Hyperkin HDTV cables against the analog Mega SG. And you will notice the Mega SG does produce a cleaner, sharper, brighter image. It's not a drastic difference, but it's definitely better. In this example with the Mega SG on the left, if you notice Sonic, he's in motion right now, and the resolution and sharpness looks great. But on the right with the Hyperkin HD TV cables, if you take a look at Sonic, you notice he looks slightly blurry, and the resolution sharpness does not look so good. The sound quality coming from the Mega SG is also cleaner, but I actually prefer the sound coming from my original Genesis using the Hyperkin HD TV cables. It's not quite as clean sounding, but it sounds more like what I remember hearing when I was a kid, and that's probably because the sound's coming from the original Genesis. The sound coming from the Mega SG sounds almost too perfect, if that makes any sense at all. But for this comparison, I would have to declare the Mega SG the winner because the overall quality is better. Now I'm going to test out another 32X game on my Sega Genesis Model 2 using the Hyperkin HD TV cables. So here's my overall thoughts with the Hyperkin HD TV cable. It's not perfect, but it is a very affordable HDMI solution for your original Sega Genesis that provides a drastic improvement over composite cables. It has great compatibility with all my accessories and TVs, and gives my old Genesis a new fresh look. It does fall short in overall performance against other products out there, but if you're not looking for perfection, I think the Hyperkin HD TV cables are a great product to relive your favorite retro games on modern HD TVs. Okay, it's that time again. It's time for me to get out of here. But if you like this video, if you could, hit that like button. And I'm going to leave you with some gameplay footage showing off the Hyperkin HD TV cables in action with a handful of different games. Have yourself a great day, and I will see you next time.